Hello everyone and welcome back to Rob's Movie Reviews. I am uploading this video a little early this week. I normally upload on Mondays. However, I intend to be out of town this weekend, so I thought I'd just go ahead and do it today. The movie I want to review for you today is the 1976 version of King Kong. This is a terrific movie. It's a remake, of course, of the 1933 classic that starred Fay Wray. This film came out in '76. It stars Jessica Lange, Jeff Bridges, and Charles Grodin. It takes its own direction instead of like in the 33 version where they go to Skull Island to make a movie. In this version, it's a oil company on their way to Skull Island because they believe that there is a large reserve of oil underneath the island and they want to try to tap into it. Now, Jeff Bridges plays a character named Jack Prescott. He's a paleontologist and he stows away aboard the Petrox Explorer as it's leaving from Surabaya to head out to Skull Island. He wants to go to the island to study the animal life there. He gets discovered by the crew. He gets locked up in one of the storage rooms while Fred Wilson, who is played by Charles Grodin, who happens also to be the leader of the expedition, runs a background check to make sure that Jack is what he says he is and not a spy for another oil company. Now, during the voyage to the island, they spot a life raft floating out on the ocean, and when they pull it up to the ship, that's when they find Jessica Lange's character, Dwan. She is the sole survivor of a yacht that had exploded and killed everyone aboard. She was the only one that managed to escape in a life raft. They take her aboard the ship, nurse her back to health, and then when they get to the island, she goes ashore with them. Now, when they get there, that's when it starts to fall in line more with the original movie. They find the village with the huge wall around it and all the natives, of course, inside. And the natives are in the middle of a ceremony where they are preparing one of the women to be a sacrifice to their god. When they notice they're being watched, the chief of the tribe immediately wants Dwan. He sees Dwan, he wants her. He wants to use her as a sacrifice. Of course, they tell him no. They go ahead and retreat and go back to the ship, and then during the night, the natives come out. They kidnap Dwan. They take her back to the island. And before the crew from the ship can get there to rescue her, she is taken outside of the wall and tied up. And once all the natives are back inside and they lock the gate, that's when their god, Kong, appears. And he takes a liking almost immediately to Dwan. He's never seen a Caucasian woman before, and he's just, dumbfounded by it. He's mesmerized by her. He picks her up. He carries her off into the jungle. The crew arrive. Jack Prescott takes about 5 of the ship's crewmen with him, and he goes out into the jungle in search for Dwan. Unfortunately, as they're crossing a log over a deep ravine, Kong comes up on them. Jack manages to get off the log and hide as Kong pretty much shakes the log and all the other men fall to their deaths. And then a little later on, when Kong goes into battle with this huge snake that's trying to eat Dwan, and he's distracted in fighting the snake, she is able to get away from him, meet up with Jack, and they get back to the village before Kong can catch up with them. And in the meantime, while all that was going on, Fred Wilson has found out that the oil that is present on the island is not yet at a stage where it can be refined. So the trip's going to be a bust. But he comes up with the idea, hey, I can't come back with oil. I'm going to bring this giant ape back with me. We're going to use him as a advertising tool. He'll be a Fred S. Wilson exclusive. So he has his crew dig a huge pit. They fill it with chloroform. Once Kong busts his way through the gate trying to find Dwan, he falls into the pit. He's knocked out. They load him aboard a huge oil tanker, take him back to the States where he is presented to the public in New York City at a huge extravaganza. They roll him out inside of a big steel cage. They reenact the whole native ritual. They tie Dwan up. Fred Wilson's out there telling the folks on over the PA exactly what's happening, what happened to Dwan on the island. Kong sees Dwan. He sees the photographers pushing her around, trying to get her in position for the pictures they want to take. He loses his temper. He rips the cage apart. He escapes. He goes after Dwan. He crushes a whole lot of people under his feet trying to catch up to her. And fortunately, Fred Wilson's one of them. You'll be glad when that happens because Charles Grodin is excellent in the role. And he really knows how to get under your skin. And by the time he gets killed, you're happy to see it. But just like the 33 version, Kong manages to find Dwan and catch her again. And he puts her on his shoulder. And he climbs, in this movie, instead of climbing to the top of the Empire State Building, he climbs to the top of the World Trade Centers. And once they get up there, of course, shortly after they get to the top, Kong is attacked by a group of helicopters with Gatling guns on them. Instead of airplanes in this movie, they use helicopters. Kong gets shot up pretty bad. He manages to take out a couple of the choppers, but they do the damage, and he's so weak that he ends up falling off of the top of the trade centers and falls to his death. Just like in the original movie. And it's a lot more emotional in this one because they do a great job of creating an emotional bond between Kong and Dwan, so that by the time you reach the climax of the movie, you're actually sad to see Kong die. And Dwan and Jack are both very tore up by it. Of course, there's nothing they can do about it. It had to be done. Now, as far as performances in this movie, Jessica Lange, it was her first feature film, and you could tell her acting was a little rough around the edges. Her character was a little transparent, but you did see, moments where she would shine, and you could tell that there was a bright future ahead of her. Jeff Bridges was brilliant. He had already done some television and movie work before he appeared in this movie. At this point, though, he had not yet got out from under the shadow of his father, the great Lloyd Bridges, but King Kong served as the springboard that would push him out there in the public eye, and he would finally develop his own identity as a performer and an actor and no longer live in the shadow of his father. Charles Grodin was great, as Charles Grodin always is. I believe this was his first major role in a movie. He had been in a lot of films through the years leading up to this, but he was mainly used as a character actor. I think the biggest role prior to Kong was he played a doctor in the 1960s horror film Rosemary's Baby. That was his only significant role prior to doing Kong. And a very interesting bit of trivia here. The Kong costume was created by the famous Hollywood makeup man, Rick Baker. And not only did he create the costume, but he also was the man in the costume. He played Kong in the movie. Now, if you've never seen the 1976 version of King Kong, You owe it to yourself to watch this. It's, like I said, personally, I think it's a better movie than the 1933 version. A lot of people are going to disagree with that, but in my opinion, this is the better version. There's also the early 2000s remake by Peter Jackson, which I'm not even going to go into that. I did not like that movie. I might do a review of that one of these days just so I can sit here and pick it apart because I just did not like that movie at all. But this is a great movie. If you're a King Kong fan, fan of the traditional Kong story, I'm not talking about, the Japanese Toho movies, where King Kong fights Godzilla and all that silliness. And even though it is a great movie in its own right, Kong Skull Island, I wouldn't consider a traditional Kong tale either. That's more in line with the Japanese movies, but not as over the top. And like I said, that's a great movie in its own right. But as far as the traditional Kong story, this is the quintessential version of King Kong. And that's really all I've got to say about this movie. Check back with me in a couple weeks. I will go back to uploading on Mondays. And until then, you all take care.